We're starting a new book today, Shemot, which is what we're commonly thinking of Exodus. Okay, but that's not really the Hebrew name of the book. We go through this every time we enter in the new book, a new stage. More than ever, what you call something and your attitude as you approach something will affect how you receive that something. And so when we're here, when we read the book of Exodus, if our emphasis is just the Exodus, we're really missing a bigger picture here. Because there's more that's at stake than just Exodus. Because them coming out of Egypt is only a small part of this. But if we stick to the name, Shemot, then we look at character. Then we look at not just the character of Israel, but the character of the God who redeems them. So we've got a lot to really look at in this book, and I don't want to go too far into that because I'm going to touch on that in just a minute, okay? But I want us, as we go through this book, to be challenged to see beyond what we've seen before. Because, think about it. Other than, the movies regarding Yeshua, what do you most often hear about as far as biblical movies? The Ten Commandments, right? And so look, we know what the book of Exodus says because Charlton Heston nailed it, right? Not really. Not really. So we've got to make sure that we're paying attention to what the Scripture is saying. And here's the challenge. Put it in the context of the rest of the Scripture. We're really good at taking books and letters, biblically speaking, taking books and the letters and the things that were written and pulling them out and reading them as standalone documents. We need to read these in context of the rest of the book and how they all flow from one to another. Okay, because context really tells us a lot. Because if we take stuff out of context, then and it's going to sound redundant, but if we take stuff out of context, then we're really going to take stuff out of context. Okay? If we pull a verse out of its context, then we can twist it to make it say whatever we want. So we've got to be careful with that. We've got to look at the Scripture in the context of how it was presented. Okay? And you can't just read the verse before it and after it and say you've got the context. A lot of times, you may have to read the whole book to get the context of one point. And then sometimes, you've got to read the books before it to gain the context. It's kind of like, if you were reading the Brit Hadashah, you can get an understanding of the Father has a heart for you, He desires you, He wants to be in covenant relationship with you. But if you started back in Bereshit, you have a better understanding. And you really have a good foundation to go forward on. And you're less likely to come up with some pretty wild ideas. Okay? Context. Right? So what's the context of this book? Well, let's take a look at it. Shemot is from the word Shem. Shem is the singular of the word Shemot. Shemot is plural. So Shem is a mark or a memorial, individuality, honor, authority, character, name. So Shem is the word we get for name. Okay? But is a person's name just what we call them? See, some of you are chuckling. How many of you have been called something that's not your name? Okay, when Yahweh is saying, do not profane His name, what does He mean? Does He mean be careful how we pronounce it? Well, yeah, I would think so. We should reverence His name. But I think it goes deeper as far as not just what we say, but our actions. How we represent Him. How we are to show Him through us. See? When we walk in His name, I believe it's walking according to His character and walking according to His word and His ways. Right? If you look in the Paleo-Hebrew, we have this word for Shem, and it gives us the idea. It's also the same word for breath. How many have heard the word neshama? Neshama. It's a word for breath, wind, sometimes translated as soul. So if we say this is their name, but also neshama, still from the word name, there's a connection between your name and your soul. So that goes deeper. It's not just something that we are called for identity purpose. It's something that's describing the very essence of our character, the very core of our life, where we're walking in His name. We walking in our own name or in his name? If we're walking in his name, then we can walk in his authority. We can walk according to his ways. When we're walking in our own name, it's a different story. You know? Like even here, when Moshe goes to the people of Israel, before he goes to Pharaoh, I mean, if you read the story, how many of you stop to realize he went to the elders of Israel before he went to Pharaoh, which is kind of mind-blowing to some because they had elders while they were in Egypt. So here he goes to them, and what was Moshe's argument? Well, who do I say sent me? Right? Kind of a deal, right? Well, is it just because they forgot his name, they want to know his name, or is it more along the lines of whose authority are you doing what you say you're going to do? I think it's more along that line. You know, Yeshua says the one that I send receives me. Right? He said the one that receives me receives the one who sent me. So, in whose name are we operating in? And that should give us room to think. Are we operating in his name? Are we operating in his life? Are we operating in his character? Or are we trying to make a name for ourselves? We trying to build his kingdom? We trying to do things his way? Or are we trying to do it our own? Right? Okay, what's in a name? What did we say a name was? A name was character, identity, right? Like when you talk to someone, I mean, what is it? Who are you talking about? You're talking about a certain person. Well, how do we know which person you're talking about? You call them out by name. So a person's name was their identity, but is also the essence, the character of who they are. And also can be part of their purpose. That's why a lot of times names weren't given until after a certain point in a person's life. To see what kind of characteristics they exhibit, then they would be named. Right? Okay. Proverbs 22:1 tells us what? That a good what? A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches and loving favor rather than silver and gold. Or can also read, rather than wealth, choose a good reputation. Choose esteem over silver and gold. So Scripture says that it's good to have a good name. Well, I kind of like my name, David. That's a good biblical name. I have a good name. Is that what it's talking about? No. It's talking about reputation. So when we say we come in his name, are we exhibiting his reputation to those that we come to? Which kind of leads us, when we come and we try to present the word of God to people, we are coming in his name. Are we representing him well? Or are we coming to people to show the heart of the Father as we're beating them up because they don't see it our way? See, when Moses went to Israel, he gave them the promises. He gave them the things that they needed to hear. Even when he went to Pharaoh, when they first went to Pharaoh, what did he say? He said, let my people go. He didn't come say, you lousy, no good, rotten snake. Right? No, he first came to give them the opportunity to do what is right. Right? He didn't even approach Pharaoh like that. So we need to make sure we are operating in his name. So shemot is identity. Okay? Now the thing is, did the people really know who they were? And you may be thinking, well, of course they know who they were. I mean, they were the sons of Israel. Okay. As a nation, they were the sons of Israel. They were Hebrew, right? But let's go beyond this. Did they remember where their home was? They're in exile. They've been in exile their whole life. Here they are. Did they forget who they were? Did they forget what God has promised to them? Did they forget their purpose for being in Egypt? Their purpose for being in Egypt was to grow numerous in number so that Yahweh could show his might and his great strength when he brings them out according to the promise he gave to Abraham many years before. See, we can't talk about Shemot, the book of Exodus, and disassociate it from Bereshit, Genesis. Because we don't understand why they're there. We don't understand what happened. We don't understand that them being in Egypt was prophecy. Them being in Egypt was a promise. Them being in Egypt was part of the plan that Yahweh had to bring deliverance not just to the people there, but ultimately deliverance to the world. So Have we forgotten where home is? Are we comfortable in exile? It's because, Israel grew, became great in number, and became comfortable until the world turned on them and enslaved them. Right? Where are we citizens? That's a good question. Where are we citizens? Do we place more value, especially here in America, do we place more value on being an American than we do being part of a covenant of a people called Israel? Do we place more value on our exile identity, the nations, scattered in all the different nations, than we do placing emphasis on the people called to covenant as Israel? Because you see, if we continue to identify as exile, and I'm not telling you have to completely forget where you came from, but what I'm saying is, if we're constantly looking back to where we came from, we're not going to see where the Father's calling us to. And if he's calling us to be a people called Israel, well, in Israel, they were one people, but they were 12 tribes with very distinct and different personalities, very different ways of thinking and doing things. You could even say different cultures. And here they are, they're together as one people. Now, they weren't to stay in the nations. They were to be gathered together as part of a body. And if we can't see that, we're missing the bigger picture. 1 Peter tells us, dear friends, I urge you as what? Aliens and temporary residents, not to give in to the desires of your old nature, which keep warring against you. I'm going to say, as aliens and temporary residents here, don't get so caught up on where you came from and where you're at that you forget that the Father is calling you out. Because why do you think, this is tough. Why do you think so many people did not come back from Babylon? Would you? Think about it. So here, the people, they get carried off into Babylon, and the time has come for them to return to Jerusalem. Not everybody did. They had lives in Babylon. They had good jobs. They had businesses. They had families. They had all these things. They made a life for themselves in Babylon. So they didn't go back to the land of promise because they were comfortable in exile. What is the Father going to have to do in our life to point us back to the promise and not living for ourselves, but living for Him? Right? Jeremiah 46:27. But as for you, do not fear, O my servant Yaakov, and do not be discouraged, O Israel. For look, I am saving you from where? From afar. Thinking country, that meant like a big bonfire? Saving you from afar, and your descendants from the land of their captivity. And Yaakov shall what? Return. And shall have rest and be at ease with no one disturbing. Do not fear, O Yaakov, my servant, declares Yahweh, for I am with you. Though I make a complete end of what? All the Gentiles to which I have driven you, yet I do not make a complete end of you, but I shall reprove you in right ruling and by no means leave you unpunished. The promise here is God is telling us He's going to judge all nations. He's going to judge all people. When it comes down to that, who are we going to identify with? Especially, think about this. When all nations come against Israel, who are you going to stand with? And when God sends judgment for nations that are coming against Israel, is He going to send judgment against, that person and that person and that person, or is He going to judge the nation? See? More stuff to consider. Who do we really consider us to be a part of? Or where is home? Who do we serve? Right? So, Exodus. Va'ele shemot b'nei Israel. Really interesting that the book of Exodus starts with the Hebrew letter what? Vav. So what does that tell us? Well, the letter Vav is a conjunction. It translates as and, which means this whole book starts with it being connected to what came before it. Context. You can't say, and now, Here's something completely different. There was this guy named Joseph that Pharaoh forgot. Well, if we don't know who Joseph was, why does it matter that he forgot him? If we don't know who the sons of Israel are, why does it matter that they're in Egypt? Matter of fact, when God brings them out, is that a standalone event of deliverance? Or did God actually say to Abraham, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to bring deliverance to your people, and furthermore, this is how I am going to show that you will be a blessing to all nations, and I will bless them who bless you, I will curse them to curse you, and in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed and grafted in. If we don't see that, then when we come to the book of Exodus without understanding it's a conjunction, we're not going to get the point. And we're going to come up with a completely different idea of what the emphasis of the book really is. Okay? How does Bereshit end? Genesis 50, 24 to 26. So Yosef says to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will visit you and bring you out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. Then Yosef made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Yosef died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. So Genesis ends how? With the promise of carrying Joseph's bones back into the land. Genesis ends with a family who is in exile. But are they supposed to stay there? No. They are a family in exile, but however, they have a promise that they are supposed to return. And when they return, well, they're not going to return as a little family, are they? They're going to return as a nation of people. They must become numerous. They must grow and flourish while they are in exile and become a great many people. So then when the Father delivers them out of this place, all the world is going to know. Because that's a big event. All the world is going to know that he is bringing them out and he is delivering them. And this is a people called Israel. This is not a little from here, a little from here, a little from here, a little from here. No, they are a people who are gathered together. Okay? But what happens for now, though? But for now, here we are as we're opening this book and we're starting a new place. They seem forgotten. They're still in exile. They are. And what we come to is that they need a deliverer. They need a redeemer. They are in the need of, God said you're going to be here and they're growing numerous and this was part of the promise, but they're not supposed to stay there. How in the world is he going to bring them out? See, they don't know that part yet. He said he was going to do it, but we don't know how that's going to happen. Kind of like when Israel is crying out, or even, we hear, well, there was a prophecy that there would be a deliverer and a redeemer. How? Who would know? How would they know about this prophecy? How would they know about this? You could say, well, people among them who have a prophetic gift, well, quite possibly, but it could just be some people who heard from grandpa, who heard from grandpa, who heard from grandpa. We're only supposed to be here for 400 years. And look at us now. How are we going to get out of here? Right? So what happens? Exodus 1:6. So Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were what? Fruitful. Hey, there's that word fruit. Like Ephraim, right? Same word, right? Fruitful. They were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceeding strong, so that the land was filled with them. And, verse 8, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Why would that be important? So the people were great. There was a whole bunch of them. They were not enslaved at this point. Joseph died. There came a period of time where there arose a king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. There's some speculation that this was part of the people who were the Hyksos that came in, that conquered, not really going there. The point of the whole thing is there was someone who did not know the story of Israel. Further, they didn't care. Because they didn't know Joseph. They didn't know what good Joseph did for Egypt. They didn't care what good Joseph did for Egypt. They didn't care what legacy he had. They didn't care what was going on. All they cared about was their own prosperity and their own good. When he enslaved Israel, he had them building cities. What kind of cities? It says specifically, what kind of cities? Store cities. It's not like he had them building cities with malls and stores and all these other kind of things. He had them building barns. He had them building silos. He had them building the places to store all his wealth. So can you imagine? He enslaved them. He enslaved Israel to build places to store all his stuff. He was so rich, he's like, you got to build me cities to store all the wealth that I have. Wow. Now you're starting to get an understanding of why God had to crush him. Right? Okay. So king arose who did not know Joseph. What we find is that Israel is pictured here as characterless, faceless, and bereft of leadership. They were easily oppressed because why? There was no leader to stand up to Pharaoh or no leader to actually lead the people. See, it was recorded that there were elders in Egypt for Israel. Because like we said, when Moses went to Egypt and he said, this is what happened to me at the mountain, who did he tell first? He told the elders of Israel, which meant there were elders in Israel, in Egypt, even though, all these things were happening to them. So what was going on is that the elders, the leaders, there were people who were supposed to be leading the people, supposed to be standing up for the people, supposed to be protecting the people, and they didn't do it. And what happened? The people became enslaved. Because the shepherds did not hold to their responsibility, the sheep suffered. We find Ezekiel 34:8. It says, as I live, Adonai Elohim swears, because my sheep have become prey. My sheep have become food for every wild animal, since there was no shepherd. Since my shepherds didn't look for my sheep, and instead my shepherds fed themselves, but not my sheep. Numbers 27:16. Let Adonai, the God of the spirits of all human beings, appoint a man to be over the community, to go out and come in ahead of them, to lead them out, to bring them in, so that Adonai's community will not be like what? Sheep without a shepherd. Matthew 9:36, Yeshua came and he saw the crowds and he had compassion on them because they were harried and helpless like what? Sheep without a shepherd. And then he began to teach them and feed them. So sheep need shepherds. As much as sometimes sheep don't want shepherds, sheep need shepherds. And here's the thing, we're sheep. It's like we said before, we're either sheep, goats, or, should I say it? Wolves. So we need to make sure that we have a shepherd. Yeshua is our great shepherd. The problem comes in when we say, well, I submit to Yeshua and nobody else because even Yahweh chose people. See, that doesn't discount there have been problems. That doesn't discount there have been abuses, okay? But Scripture does say that he will appoint shepherds after his own heart. We do say that we do need to be accountable to one another and we do need to help each other. We need that, okay? Because otherwise, we're going to be easily oppressed and easily led astray. Sometimes by ourselves. See? Have you ever felt forgotten? I mean, let's be honest. At some point in our lives, you felt forgotten. Now, varying degrees, one point or another, different time frames, but at some point, you felt forgotten. Is this the first time Yosef has felt forgotten? Think about that. Not at all. I mean, how about this? What about in the pit? When his brother, they threw him in the pit, and then they went off and ate lunch. You think he felt forgotten? What about when they sold him into slavery? Do you think he felt forgotten? What about in the prison? I mean, really in the prison. Because here he runs into the cupbearer and the baker, and he tells the baker he's going to die, but he tells the cupbearer, you're going to be restored. But he says, when you do, when you come out, and when this happens to you, remember me. You feel forgot? How about Pharaoh? Pharaoh didn't know Yosef. Feel forgotten? How about this? Yosef, or Ephraim, right, is cast into exile, is yet to be returned. You think Yosef has forgotten their identity? You think Yosef, Ephraim, has forgotten who they are? So this is the question. We are one more time looking at identity. Do you feel forgotten? We need to look and say who we are. We need to look and see who he is. Because when we look to see who he is, then we start to get an idea of who we are. Right? Deuteronomy 31:6. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is Yahweh your God who goes with you. What does it say? He will not leave you or forsake you. Then Moshe summoned Yehoshua, and he said to him, in the sight of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land that Yahweh has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall put them in possession of it. It is Yahweh who goes before you. He will be with you. He what? Will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. So can you imagine there in Egypt, they were doing great. They were prospering. They were doing wondrous. And then they're not. And could you see, has God forgotten us? Aren't we supposed to be delivered at some point soon? Is it going to happen? Has God forgotten us? You ever feel like, okay, God, you said, when's it going to happen? Right? You ever felt that way? You know, that's why they say he's always on time, on his time, not ours. Okay? Now, we don't always like how things progress or how things happen, but God is never late. Okay, so they were forgotten. The name of Yosef meant what? Nothing. The name of Yosef meant nothing to this Pharaoh. What about Ephraim and Manasseh? They meant nothing to this Pharaoh. What about their identity as respective tribes? They called them the Hebrews, which is fine, okay? But understand that their identity now was not as the individual tribes and the leaders of it. Because when they had tribes, they had patriarchs for the tribes, right? The names they're called by, right? But if you remove their identity, you group them together and they still lose their association, well, who's leading them now? Nobody is. That's why Moshe had to come into the scene, because they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. The leaders among the tribes were not doing their responsibility. And so now this Pharaoh is identifying with them as, well, that's pretty interesting. He calls them by a collective one, which is a good testimony to prophecy, but at the same time, the people individually has lost their identity. But these two things need to work together. See that? Because say we are Israel, but did they lose their identity as the individual tribes? Wasn't that needed? Was that important? If it was not important, why is it when God brought them out, he reordered how they came out by tribe? Can you imagine? They were grouped together by exile. They were grouped together because of the tasks that they had to do. They could have people from all tribes working here making bricks. They could have people from all tribes carrying things. They could have people from all tribes gathering straw. But now when the time came for them to be delivered and brought out, that they had to be identified among their tribes as who they are, as well as a grouping of Israel as a people. They weren't identified by their exile. They weren't identified by the task that they did. They were identified as who they were. That's a different change of perspective. So what did Pharaoh have to say about him? Exodus 1:9. He said to his people, behold, what does he call them? The people of the sons of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Literally, b'nei Israel. We say Israel, the people of Israel, but he says b'nei Israel, the people of the sons of Israel. Wow. See, Pharaoh recognized them as the sons of Israel, which is still interesting because he recognized them as the sons of Israel, but he didn't know Joseph. He recognized them as Jacob's boys, but he didn't know Joseph. See what I mean? There's something in here where there's identity that's being lost, and because identity is being lost, the favor and the things that were given because of covenant and because of what was going on with Joseph is forgotten. I think that kind of alludes to some prophetic things down the road, don't you? Okay. So Pharaoh was driven by fear of losing power. Let me put it to you this way. Politics. He was in fear of losing his earthly power, fear of losing his earthly position, his earthly seat. Because he says, the people of Israel are too mighty and too numerous for us. Let's make them allies. Is that what he says? No. He says, let's enslave them. Because if they join with our enemies, they can defeat us. They're too many and too mighty and too powerful. So before they get the idea that they can overcome us, we shall overcome them. Aha. And he says, let's use wisdom with them. That's not wisdom. See, because wisdom is the ways of Yahweh, and that's earthly wisdom, that's not godly wisdom, right? And further, he identifies them as an it. He says, come, let us enslave who? The Hebrew, who, which is it or him, or it's singular. So he first has to dehumanize them in the sight of the people so that he can cause them to be viewed as less than. So because of that, now the people will rally around them to treat them as such, to treat them as animals. Because they're not human. They're an it. Does that sound familiar? Didn't that happen? Okay. So when fear is a motivator, it leads you to make bad choices. Don't let fear make your decisions. That's what Pharaoh did. Okay, and that caused his heart to be hard, right? So Pharaoh did not acknowledge the relationship that he had with Israel. So he sought to enslave them for fear of losing his empire. Think about this for a minute. Pharaoh did not consider the relationship he had with Israel. If he was Pharaoh, he had a relationship with Israel because of Yosef. Because of Yosef, there was an Egypt. Okay? Because the famine was so severe, if Yosef did not rise and come to power and do what he did, Egypt would have died out. They would have starved to death. Okay? So because of Yosef, there was an Egypt there. And so Pharaoh did not acknowledge his relationship with Yosef. And because of that, it led him to make decisions to come against Israel. And what did God say when you come against Israel? I will curse those who curse you. See? So he was a king, but was he a good king? No. Because he was not working in relationship with what God had established. And this is a good teaching for us. Because we need to understand our relationship with Israel. We need to understand our relationship with each other. Whether if we have a realm of authority in this earth or not, as far as each other goes, we need to see each other as brothers and treat each other accordingly. Okay? Things like this. James 4. What causes quarrels and causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? Because we let the things within us get out of control and we don't subdue those things. Doesn't that cause turmoil? Yes. Not just to us, but those around us as well, right? Verse 2. You desire and you do not have, so what's the result? You want something, you don't get it, so what do you do about it? You murder! Yeah, that makes sense. See, this shows the depravity, doesn't it? It shows if we allow ourselves to go unchecked, we do not operate in the things that God is telling us to, this is where it leads. This is where it goes. So you desire and don't have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. Well, how come they have that and I want it? I deserve that. How do I get it? Well, if you can have it, I'm just going to take it from you. Right? You don't have because you don't ask. And you ask and don't receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. It's like, you don't have because you don't ask. Okay, well, I'm asking. Why ain't I getting it now? Because you have the wrong attitude. You got the wrong heart concerning it. All right? 2 Timothy 2:14. Keep reminding people of this and charge them solemnly before the Lord not to engage in word battles. They accomplish nothing useful and are a catastrophe to the hearers. Do all you can to present yourself to God as someone worthy of his approval, a worker with no need to be ashamed, because he deals straightforwardly with the word of the truth. But keep away from godless babbling, for those who engage in it will only become more ungodly, and their teaching will eat away at people like gangrene. You ever do that? I mean, people just arguing just because they want to argue with someone? And they want to argue because they don't like where they're at. Because there's something within them that doesn't, so they're wanting to argue. And I know we say it, we make fun, we laugh at everything, but seriously, Facebook? You know? Exodus 1:22. So, Pharaoh gave this order to who? To the Hebrews, right? Nah, consider this. Think about this. Pharaoh gave the order to all his people, all that were in Egypt. Every boy that is born, throw in the river, but let all the girls live. He didn't just give this to the Hebrews. He did this to his own people as well. Kill all the children. Kill all the boys. Kill them off. Why? Because they were unsure if the deliverer that would come would be Hebrew or Egyptian. Think about Yosef. Think about Moses. Were they Hebrew or were they Egyptian? Well, yes. So this deliverer that is to come, will he be Hebrew or will he be Egyptian? We don't know. So to cover our bases, kill them all. Let the river judge them. Which, that's what they did, right? Because the river Nile was considered a god, considered a deity. The Nile was an access to the underworld in their thinking. So throw them in the river. Let the gods judge them. If they survive, then they are worthy. Why do you think it was such a big deal when Moses came down the river? It's not just like here Pharaoh's daughter was out there, oh, a baby, let me defy my father. And take him into Pharaoh's house and going, hey, you weren't pregnant, where'd this kid come from? Right? Furthermore, come diaper change time, hey, this is a Hebrew. Right? But he came out of the river. The gods judged him, so they would have in their thinking, and he was worthy. Therefore, we must draw him out and care for him, because he must have a special purpose. See, God even used their thinking for what he wanted to do. Right? Even the name Moshe means draw out. Which is not just because I drew him out of water. Yeah, and he drew people out of Egypt. Right? This is the same assignment that was given through Herod. You know that? The same assignment that was given through Herod in Matthew 2, because of the prophecy of a deliverer, kill all the male children. Is it any different today, really? I mean, some of the circumstances are different. But isn't the cry that's going forward still kill the children? So, this is the same assignment at work against you. How is that so? Because it puts us in a place where it tells us we have no hope. There is no Messiah. There is no Mashiach. There is none who comes to deliver you. What do you mean of these prophecies and these ancient sayings? They mean nothing. You may have heard a story your whole life about how you're going to be here and leave. You ain't going nowhere. You belong to me. You're going to keep building these cities. Because you're enslaved. So here's the thing, if you remove the deliverer, you remove the hope, and then you remove the authority to overcome. We need a deliverer. We need one to tell us, this is not the way this is supposed to be. These people have oppressed you, and I will judge them because of that, and I will bring you out and bring you to myself. And I will teach you my ways, and then I will give you a land that is yours that I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Moses comes. And the question is he a prince or is he a shepherd? Well, yes. Here we are again, right? It's like the good rabbi answer. Well, you have a point. Yeah, but you have a point, So he was raised as a prince. I mean, think about it, guys. He was raised and trained and taught in Egypt. He would have gone to the best schools, had the best teachers, the best that they would offer, so to speak, in their culture. But he would have been taught and trained in all their thinking, theology, and everything. But when the time came, who did he identify with? Because it says that he was walking along and he saw one of his brothers being beaten. How did he know that they were his brothers? He had to have known, right? Okay, so when we seek to do things, do we seek to do them in our own strength? Do we seek to, in our own ideas of justice, do we take matters in our own hands? Do we repay evil for evil? Because that's what Moses did the first time around, isn't it? Granted, he shouldn't have done nothing, but how did he handle the situation with the Hebrew who was being beaten. He killed a man. And what happened when he killed a man? He lost credibility in the sight of his brothers. Think about this. Hey, I saved your life. You're like, and can you imagine? You save somebody's life and they come back at you like, what are you going to do, kill me too? Really? But tell me that's not human nature. Tell me that's not the way we are. How quickly we forget the good that's been done for us and who did it for us. Right? So what happens? Exodus 2:11. So one day when Moshe was a grown man, he went out to visit his kinsmen, and he watched them struggling at forced labor, and he saw an Egyptian strike a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. About how old was he? About 40 years old, right? We see that in Acts 7. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw no one was around, he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. So the next day, he went out and he saw two Hebrew men fighting with each other. To the one in the wrong, he said, "Why are you hitting your companion?" And he said, "Who made you ruler of this outfit? Who you think you are? You gonna kill me like you killed the Egyptian? I saw it." So what happened? Oh, I know what happened. Pharaoh heard about it, and he exiled Moses, right? No, Moses fled. See, because, yes, Pharaoh wanted to kill him, but again, one of those embellished things we see in the movies that didn't really happen, okay? Moses fled before they could get his hands on him, okay? Ecclesiastes 7:8. The end of something is better than its beginning. That's good advice, isn't it? When you just start something, you may not be able to see the end of it, but the end of it is better than the beginning. So the patient are better than the proud. Don't be quick to get angry, for only fools nurse anger. Don't ask why the old days were better than now, because that's a foolish question. Notice he puts in longing for yesteryear in with anger. Because it's not being satisfied with what God is doing in your life right now. We're blaming God because we're not where we wanted to be right now. We'll fix it. You can't keep looking back and saying, "God, it's your fault I'm not where I want to be." Well, maybe he doesn't want you where you think you need to be. Why don't we just submit to him and let him do his work in us? Right? James 1:19. Therefore, my dear brothers, let every person be what? Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. Why? Because a person's anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. Let's just face the truth, guys. When we get angry, we don't really stop to think about, am I behaving righteously? We don't, do we? When we get angry, we're mad and someone's going to pay, right? I'm going to argue with someone. We're going to do something, right? But a person's anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. Okay? If we're people who are supposed to show the righteousness of God, then we need to be careful how we conduct our lives. Right? So he's a shepherd. He needs to be trained as a shepherd. He goes off and he encounters a well. He encounters Yitro. Yitro brings him into the family. He gets a daughter. He gives Moshe one of his daughters. They gets married. He becomes a shepherd. He learns that he has to lay his life down for the flock. He can't just go around and if you get two sheep that are fighting, do you kill one of the sheep? No. You correct the sheep, but you don't kill that sheep. Because why? Because that's your flock you're meant to protect. You don't protect them by killing them. Okay? So he has to learn to lay his life down for the sheep. He has to learn to look out for the benefit of others. And he has to ward off the things that would cause harm. Okay? He has to point or lead the way to good water and good pastures. Because Yah will provide, Yah will protect, Yah will repay. Okay? So Moshe had to learn to experience the wilderness because he knew Egypt, right? He had to learn to experience the wilderness. Notice, when he brings Israel out, where do they go back to? The mountain. Because God tells them, when you bring the children of Israel out, you will bring them back to this mountain to worship me. So he brings them back to this mountain. He had to learn to experience the wilderness. He had to learn to be a shepherd. He had to experience the mountain. What happened at the mountain? It was the call. He had to then return to Mitzrayim, and then he had to return to the mountain with all Israel. This was all things he needed to experience to be that person that Yah had called him to be. Okay? It's kind of like if Yahweh had told Moshe, Moshe, I want you to go in, and you're going to lead my people out. Okay, so he goes in, and day one, hey guys, let's get out of here, and then nothing happens. Well, now he's mad and upset and frustrated because, well, God, you said I was going to be this deliverer, and it's been 3 hours and nothing's happened. Right? See, that's us. There were things he had to experience along the way so that he could fulfill the promise that was given to him, much like us. Just because God has said, there's something that I have for you, doesn't mean the next day it's going to happen. Okay? When he told Abraham, I'm going to give you a son, how long did he wait? 25 years. When he said that your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, how long did they have to wait? Well, he was already long gone. See, there are things that will happen when Yah says that will happen. And there are things that we need to experience to be what he has called us to be and walking out his word. Okay? So Exodus 3. So now Moshe was keeping the flock of Yitro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the farthest end of the wilderness, and he came to the mountain of God unto Horeb. So what happens now? So the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of fire out of the midst of the bush, and this is a thorn bush. Okay, what difference does it make what kind of bush it is? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. So this was a thorn bush. He looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. So we have the burning bush. So why is it a thorn bush? Because it is the Hebrew sineh, which means to prick, to bramble, or a bush. What do thorn bushes symbolize? Affliction. Think like Abraham. Think Yeshua. What do thorns represent? Affliction, being afflicted. So even in the picture of his presence being in the midst of the bush and the fire, which I believe the fire was his presence, not just a flame. Okay, that's why it was there. And it's like Yeshua at the Mount of Transfiguration, right? Just this bright, shining, this flame. What's the hottest fire? White. So we have this flame and it's burning, but the bush is not consumed. I believe that was the presence, the dwelling presence of Yah. And why among thorns? The presence of Yah among thorns, saying, I've seen the affliction of my people. I have seen these things, but there is a promise I will bring them out. Though my people are in distress, I will deliver them. This is what he's calling. Exodus 3:2. So it burned and was not consumed. Think Deuteronomy 33:16. When the blessing was the favor of him who lived in the burning bush. Lived in the burning bush? Did he live in the burning bush? No, he dwelled in the burning bush. He didn't pitch a tent there. Okay? He dwelled in the burning bush. He says, may the blessing come on the head of Yosef and on the brow of the prince among his brothers. So the word is shechan. Same as mishkan. What was the word mishkan? The tabernacle. Same as Shekinah, which is what? The dwelling presence of Yahweh. So the fire was the glory of Yah. Okay? Exodus 3:4. When Adonai saw that he had gone over to see God, Elohim called to him, that is Vayikra, from the middle of the bush. And he called out, Vayikra, to Moshe to draw out. Because Moshe was drawn out and called out of Egypt for what purpose? Of being a deliverer. So he called out to him to come to him. And when he came to him, what did he tell him to do? To remove his shoes, remove his sandals, because the place you're coming is holy ground. Here's just food for thought. In the ancient world, if to wear shoes into someone's house or shoes in someone's property or something like that, it was a piece of ownership. It was a show of authority. Okay? So that's why if I went to someone's house, I would remove my shoes because that's their house, not mine. They have rule in their home, I don't. Okay? So when he's approaching the holy place, he's removing his shoes, God is saying, you don't have rule here, I do. As you approach me, you don't do it your way, you don't do it in your authority, you don't do it in your strength, you do it my way. So when you approach me, you remove your shoes. And that's why he was told to do that. Because before God, what did Moses own? Nothing. So when he came before him humbly. Okay? And then what did he tell him? Even though he was humble, he still tried to get out of it, didn't he? It showed you the view that Moses had of himself. He wasn't just arguing with God saying, I don't want to do it. But it really shows you the view of how he viewed himself as defeated. He viewed himself as, well, God, I really felt that I was supposed to help my people. I tried it. It didn't work. I tried to be a deliverer to my people, but it didn't work. I mean, think about it. If you tried to deliver all those people one at a time, yeah, it wouldn't work, would it? So he had this within him, but he just didn't have the right way to do it. He didn't have the means to do it. He didn't have the mind to do it. There's just no way. I mean, think about this. God has called you to some huge, great, enormous task, and there's no way in the world you could ever do it. Good. Because when it gets done, he gets all the credit. Amen. And so here we are. Moses comes to him, and it is saying, well, God, don't you have somebody else? But God, I can't talk well. I don't have the words to speak. God, I don't say the right things. God, I don't, The view that he had of himself was causing him, think about this for a minute. The view that he had of himself was causing him not to stand in the purpose God had for him. You ever talk yourself out of obedience? See? That's where Moses was. But God wasn't going to have it, was he? He said, you're going to do it. Exodus 4:10, Moses says to the Lord, oh my Lord, I'm not eloquent. I'm not a silver-tongued orator. I don't have the words to say. I can't stand before people and speak really well, and I'm not the guy that gives the pep talks. I'm not the guy that does the motivational speeches. I'm not that guy. What did he exactly say to him, though? In the Hebrew, he says, Lo ish davarim. Lo, I'm not ish, a man, davarim, of words. I'm not a man of words. It's like, God, I'm not a man of words. How am I going to go before Pharaoh? How am I going to do these things? How am I going to speak these things? I mean, in his mind, he's like, I thought I was a man of action and I took the wrong action. I didn't go and I didn't talk to the Egyptian. I killed a man because I'm not a man of words. I don't know how to approach this way. I'm not a man of words. Isn't it interesting that the last book of the Torah is Ele Hadvarim for Moshe? These are the words of Moses. Because after God was done with him, he was a man of words. See? God took him completely from where he viewed himself and turned him into how God viewed him as. Think about when Israel went into the land. They said, we ourselves, we must have appeared like grasshoppers to them. I'm sure that's how they viewed us. That's really what they're saying there. They're not saying that we looked like grasshoppers to them. They're saying we think that we looked like grasshoppers to them. They had to have looked at us like that. So it was how they viewed themselves and not looking at the promise that God had that caused them to walk as defeated. But God hasn't called you to be defeated. He's called you to overcome. So who am I? And who are you? See, this is the question that we come to. Who am I and who are you? Now, we could be speaking this to each other or we could be speaking this to Yahweh. Because it's not a bad question to ask, is it? To come before the Father and say, okay, Yah, I want you to show me who am I really? How do you see me? And further, for me to understand who I am, let me see who you are. Because until I see who you are, I can't truly see who I am. Because I can only see myself as the way the world sees me. I can't see myself the way you see me. So reveal to me your heart, your ways, and then let me see through your eyes. The people of Israel didn't know who they were because they didn't know who he was. 2 Corinthians 3:16. So when one turns to the master, the veil is taken away. Now Yahweh is a spirit, and where the spirit of Yahweh is, there is freedom. And we all, as with unveiled face, will see as in a mirror the esteem of Yahweh are being transformed into the same likeness from esteem to esteem from Yahweh the Spirit. When we approach him, we start to see the work he wants to do in us. And that, it changes everything, right? 2 Corinthians 5:17. So if anyone is in Messiah, he is a what? New creation. Old things have passed away. All things are new. Proverbs 23:7 says, for as he thinks in his heart, so is he. The things we think about, the things we meditate on, the things that we pursue, it becomes a part of us. which is why we go to Psalms 1. It says his delight is in the law of the Lord, and he meditates on it. How often? Yeah, throughout the day and in the night when he wakes up in the middle of the night, all this, right? So what does Scripture say about you? What does Scripture say about you as a new creation? In Yeshua, in your Redeemer, in the one that has redeemed you, who are you really? And I want you to pay attention to this. You ready? I want you to look at this. I want you to say this with me. 1 John 2:1 says, I am forgiven in Messiah Yeshua. I am what? Accepted. John 1:12, say with me. I am a child of God. John 15:15, say, I am Mashiach's friend. Romans 5:1, I am justified before God. Ephesians 1:5, I am adopted by God. Colossians 1:4, I am redeemed and forgiven. Colossians 2:10, I am complete in Yeshua and I am secure. Guys, if you just kind of meditate on these and think about these, I guarantee your life is going to change. But we're not done yet. Romans 8:1 and 2 says, I am free from condemnation. Romans 8:28 says, all things work for good in my life. It doesn't say you're going to get it all your way, but it says all things will work for good. Romans 8:35-39 says, I cannot be separated from God's love. Some of you need to hear that. I cannot be separated from God's love. 1 John 5:18, I am born of God and Satan cannot harm me. I am significant. John 15 says, I am a branch of what? The true vine. Amen. Ephesians 2:10 says, I am what? God's workmanship. And God does not create trash. You are his workmanship and he has a purpose. He wants to dwell and live with you and among you and all about you. 2 Corinthians 4:16. So we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away. How many of you can testify to that? With each passing year, right? Remember when you were a kid and you thought you were invincible? When you were a kid and you were fearless and didn't worry about the consequences for anything? And then one day you wake up and realize, I'm getting older. Where did that pain come from? Right? But though the outer self is wasting away, our inner self is what? Being renewed. How often? Day by day. His mercies are new every morning. His goodness is good to us every day. His grace and his mercy is given to us every day. When we wake up in the morning and we stand before the Father, we come to our feet and we're Modeh Oni Lefanecha. My life is before you, Father. When we come before him, we can see we are who he has created us to be. I will live today with purpose. My purpose is to walk and show the heart of my Father to whoever will stand still long enough for me to say, God is good. Can we show his life to those around us? That's our call. So Exodus 4:12-16. So he says, now therefore go and I will be with your mouth and I will teach you what to say. But he replied, okay, God, you got it, right? Nope. Please, Lord, send someone else. Anyone else. Anyone you want. Anyone. And God said, I am. I'm sending you. So what does it say? At this point, Adonai's anger blazed up against Moshe, and he said, all right, you got a brother, right? He's like, yeah. It says, Aaron the Levi. I know, he's a good speaker. In fact, he's coming out to meet you, and he'll be happy to see you. Think about this for a minute. God knew Moses was going to protest. He knew all these things were going to happen, and he told Aaron to go out to meet his brother and where he was before this argument even happened. Because it's not like all of a sudden Aaron's at home, he's doing nothing, right? He's at home and God appears to him and says, hey, Moses is down the block. Why don't you go meet up with him because I'm just having a hard time with him. I need you to go talk to him. No, he was out in the wilderness, out in the mountain. And think about this. To come across from Egypt to Mount Horeb, to this mountain. How long was he walking in the wilderness? How long was he out there? It's not like, oh, Moses was at the mountain. Guys, Aaron has been at this mountain before too. Right? So he sends him out. He says, and he'll be happy to see you. I bet he does. So, verse 15, you will speak to him and put words in his mouth. So God is saying, what I give you, the words that I speak to you, you give to Aaron. Aaron will be your mouth. This is interesting because what was the testimony of Yahweh when he appeared at the mountain? He says to Moshe, I don't speak like everyone else. I speak with him, some scriptures say face to face. Literally, it's mouth to mouth. He says, I speak with Moses mouth to mouth, which means Moses opened his mouth. Yahweh breathed his words into his mouth. Moshe turned around and looked at Aaron and opened his mouth, and the words of God came out to Aaron. He wasn't speaking his own words. He was speaking the words from Yahweh to Aaron. I mean, we think about this. You know, when we think about them coming before Pharaoh, we think Moses and Aaron standing back there, and Moses is the one standing here saying, Pharaoh, right? Most of the time, Aaron was the one doing the speaking. Now, there comes a point when that changes. Because I think when Moses started to understand what was really going on, what was really happening, he's like, okay, yeah, I'm doing this. Right? But even in Moses's feeling of inadequacy, God still gave him his brother to help him fulfill what God was calling him to do, even though it wasn't exactly the way that God wanted Moses to do it. But Moses needed that. But well, if that was the point, why didn't he just tell him that from the first place? Because Moses needed to hear what God's plan was. He needed to hear what God wanted him to do so that later down he could submit to it. Right? So I will be with you, and I will be with your mouth, and his teaching you both what to do. Thus, he will be your spokesman to the people. In effect, for you, he will be a mouth, and for him, you will be like God. Wow. Like I said, God was going to put the words in Moshe's mouth. Moshe was going to give the words to Aaron. Aaron was going to give the words to speak to whoever from there, to Pharaoh. I mean, how often do we see God told Moses to tell Aaron? God told Moses to tell Aaron and his sons. God told Moses to tell Aaron and his sons and the Levites. To tell Aaron and his sons and the Levites and Israel. I mean, how often do we see things like this? Right? This wasn't just something that just came to be. Yahweh even here was establishing order. Not a hierarchy, an order. Okay?